I'm a big believer in meaning. I actually think that we have to start bringing meaning back into work. It's what motivates people.
Does it motivate you?
100%. We're doing this every day. It's a hard job. You're working, you're away from your family. I just had a son, he's 10 months old.
Congrats.
Thanks, first child. And it really made me reflect on this concept of meaning, because now it's about what is the value of my time that I'm spending away from my son.
Welcome to Coffee with Mr. IoT, a weekly chat with Robert Schmidt, Deloitte's chief futurist, and the builders, dreamers, founders, and wild children of the IoT universe. This podcast can also be viewed on the Coffee with Mr. IoT YouTube channel.
Today I'm talking with Erica Volini, our global leader for human capital. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
It's awesome to have you. Human capital, what does that mean? What do we do? I know it's part of it, but it's just sort of like, what does that mean for people who watch the show? What do you?
Well, it's a fascinating question, actually, because the definition, I feel like, has evolved over time.
Okay.
If we were 20 years ago, people might think, human capital, that's personnel. And it evolved to be human resources, which took on a broader remit. But in today's world of the future of work, it's really about how you optimize the potential of the humans that are part of your workforce. And that's about how you leverage technology to augment human capabilities. It's about how you organize, reward, motivate, develop the workforce, and how you reconstruct work in order to bring out the best that humans have to offer. So a really exciting topic and a very exciting time.
I find it fascinating. I've worked in Deloitte, and then I left Deloitte, and then I came back 10 years later. Okay. So, I don't know, somewhere, the grass wasn't green on the other side. But I don't know, so many companies call HR different things. Why is that? We don't even call our own talent group HR. What is it? I think this must be the most names for one department in any company.
I think it's being caught up in a historical brand. I think a lot of people, when they think of HR, think administration, policies, procedures, or the fluffy stuff, as we've all heard before. And I think the reality is as we see names like Chief People Officer, focusing on talent, we're seeing Chief Workforce Officer start to emerge. It's a recognition that we need to elevate beyond just processes and procedures. That this is really, when we talk human capital strategy, we're talking business strategy. And that mindset shift is a difficult one to get done. Sometimes renaming helps with the journey.
Yeah, I think I should have taken a page out of your book when I was leading IT, because IT has a pretty bad reputation at times too. So interesting, very interesting. So one of the reasons we are here today at the Singularity University Global Summit. There's a lot of conversations. I know you've talked about this years ago, and it's been a topic of us, but the workforce of the future, or the workplace of the future. I'm curious about your particular take. What's changed, and why are we talking about this today?
I think actually it'd be easier to talk about what stayed the same, because it's so little that has stayed the same is the truth. I mean, the biggest change is the workforce of the future isn't just about full-time employees, right? When you look at the workforce, you have to look at a frame we use is hot, warm, and cold bodies. So hot being your full-time employees, warm being your gig economy, how you're pulling in contractors and individuals that are not working full time but are absolutely contributing. And then your cold bodies, which is your automation, whether it's robotics, whether it's cognitive, whether it's AI. And when you start to redefine the workforce through that lens, all of a sudden your remit is a lot broader. And all of a sudden, all your systems that are used to track your workforce, you could see they're very limited, because usually they're only designed for the hot bodies or the full-time employees in your organization. But you can't sustain yourself with that anymore. I mean, we're talking about by 2020, which is around the corner, 40-50% of workforces might be coming from the gig economy, right? So the shifts are happening. And the question is, how do you as an organization start to prepare for that shift? Because it is so dramatic. And the way I describe it is, it's like, how you pull the hem on your pant and you're like, I'll just pull this one thread off and then I'll get it off. And then all of a sudden you're like unraveling and the thread becomes so long. That's sort of how I think about this topic is once you redefine the workforce itself, it impacts everything in your organization. Everything from how you bring talent and capabilities in, how you get them ready to adjust to this constantly evolving environment where the half-life of skills is declining, to how you're going to keep them motivated so you're driving an increase in productivity. And like I said, those are business challenges that every CEO, every board is starting to ask about and will care about moving forward.
I have to admit, while you were talking about, you started with the hot bodies and the warm bodies, right?
Yeah.
I was kind of like wondering, well, who's going to be the cold body? And then I thought, wow, do I want to be called a warm body versus a hot body? I was like, the marketing thing was going on in my head, sort of like, how do I feel about that, to be called a warm body versus a hot body? But anyhow, I don't think the cold bodies really have feelings about this, at least not yet. So
they don't. Thank goodness, because it gives room
He
for
would be
true
happy.
essential human skills. But hey, any good consultant comes up with a framework. That's part of the art.
I like it. It's interesting, actually. I mean, I could go philosophical on this, right? Because we talk about AI not having really ethics, which is sort of like they don't have values and feelings. And we actually want them to teach. We want to teach them values, so maybe they will eventually not like the term cold bodies anymore. We'll see how it goes.
I don't know about teaching them values, but I do think that the values associated with how they work together between the technology and the humans is becoming increasingly more important. There was actually a great article that came out in the Washington Post last month that talked about one of the major retailers who's put in technology, and the headline was, "The technology has started to make the humans feel like robots." And I think that's a real cautionary tale as we start to think about the future of work. Because technology itself can certainly provide efficiency and effectiveness. But the question is, if you don't think about it as augmentation, if you think about it as pure, I'm going to gain some efficiency and replace some jobs or some tasks, then you're actually hurting the humans and the ability for humans to optimize their productivity, to be creative, to be innovative, those things that humans and only humans alone have. And while that may seem high level or a little motherhood and apple pie, the reality is it's producing low productivity gains in the economy right now. So it's actually translating to a real business problem that I think a lot of organizations are grappling with in the context of digital. You know, you sit in IT, we have a lot of CIOs right now who are saying, I authorize millions, if not billions of dollars spent on getting to digital, and what have I showed in return? Am I truly making an impact on the business? And I think a lot of organizations are saying no. And for me, the reason why is because digital is not just about putting in new technology. It's about a shift in mindset. It's about a different way of thinking. And that's squarely what we do from a human capital standpoint, is drive that cultural shift, help bring out those essential human skills, and ultimately help optimize where organizations are in their digital journey.
So I have to ask you something. I have two questions, but I'll start with this one right there. You started saying the fluffy stuff is HR, right?
Yeah.
And then you talk about the human change and so forth. I always found it hard as a CIO to put ROI and value behind some foundational changes, right? You put a really big system in, it's really difficult. How do you put ROI behind the fluffy stuff? And I know it's not. I'm just kind of like using your words. Yeah. And you know what I mean. You please rephrase it for me.
I was going to say, I'm going to correct, because we have a lot of phenomenal CHROs, and I would hate for them. I think that has been a historical view. But to your point, I don't think it's the fluffy stuff at all. In fact, the reason why I'm talking so much about productivity is because I think that's where the ROI comes from. If we really think about how to redesign work and how to optimize work so that we're getting the maximum output from humans, and think about what are essential human skills: the ability to create, the ability to see unseen problems, the ability to innovate, the ability to connect with one another, to establish relationships. Those are the skills that are actually essential to business strategies moving forward. So if you're able to demonstrate how investing in those skills and redesigning work to bring those to the forefront will show a positive impact on productivity, that's your ROI right there. I haven't met a CEO who doesn't want to have a conversation that starts with, do you want to know how to increase the productivity for your organization? The answer is always yes. And we believe and have looked at statistics that say you're not lacking in productivity because you don't have technology. There's so much technology. Do we need more technology in the workplace? I'm not sure. That's a good debate for another podcast.
That was my next question, by the way, but let's keep going.
Individuals adopt to that technology very easily. New app comes onto our phone, boom, we know how to use it. We incorporate it. We take the update and we move on. The question is, how do you harness the power of technology in the organization? And that's where productivity starts to come into play. And the way you do that is by thinking about, are you aligning the right capabilities of your workforce with the power of the technology? Do you have plans on how you're going to continue to develop those essential human skills so that you can continue to sustain the power of that technology over time? And those are traditional human resources issues that need to be tackled. That's why the CHROs have more than a seat at the table. I think a powerful CHRO is actually running the agenda at the table today.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. I get the part of productivity really, and aligning skills with productivity improvements and all those things. So I was really curious how you're going to go about this. So thank you for that.
Yep.
So let's talk about technology a little bit, right? Two-part to this question. How much of the work that you and we do in human capital is technology focused versus not technology focused? And I'd like to talk more about sort of like, do we have enough technology? Is technology really enabling you, or is it hindering us in some ways?
Very interesting question. Number one, I think in human capital, nearly everything we do involves technology.
Thanks.
And has to, by the way. I mean, the partnership between the CIO and the CHRO is actually the most powerful partnership that I think exists in an organization. If those two stakeholders come together and work together, we call it as part of the symphonic C-suite, right? The evolution from focusing on your singular goal versus working in harmony with one another to achieve something broader. I think that partnership is incredibly powerful. And for us at Deloitte, our human capital folks are as technology fluent as anyone else within the organization and have to be. To your point around the power of technology, I actually think most of what we try to do with humans can't be done without technology. So we talk about teams. People work in teams. That's how they naturally work. How do we enhance teams? The only way we do that is through technology. Collaboration tools at the workplace that allow teams to work together. O&A, organizational network analysis, that helps you identify who the influencers are within your organization so you could build teams in an effective way. How you harness knowledge and knowledge management systems that allow you to do that. I mean, workflow, right? We talk about workflow not as workflow, standard workflow, I'm going to route you an approval, but actually enhancing the flow of work, the way that work gets done. Flow is actually something very human, right? Your blood flows through your body. How do we create that same type of natural flow in the way that work gets done to optimize the way humans best succeed in the workplace? So to me, technology is the essential element. I say bring it, get us more technology, but let's just make sure that as we bring in that technology, we're not missing the point that it's not about technology to replace, it's about technology to augment. And that's a very different mindset that we have to bring into organizations. That's the only way we believe that you're going to get the ROI that is promised.
So I just want to ask a follow-up question. I get it that we're on the same page, right? I think you need tech to make many things happen. I think tech is an enabler. It's not a means to an end. How many of our clients are actually sort of like at that step, though?
Few. Very, very few. And I think because here's what I see, standard change curve, right? I mean, you go slow and then ultimately you get up this slope. I think we're starting to see the aha, the recognition, right? We're starting to look and say, we're in the fourth industrial revolution. We've been in it for 20 years. People think digital started 5 years ago. The digital revolution started 20 years ago. So we're 2 decades in. We're not seeing the results we expect. I think that's starting to bring forth some conversations and recognition. Why aren't we seeing more clients over that hump? Because it's hard. It's hard. It's much easier to put in a technology system than it is to change the work and augment human capability to get the power of that technology to its fullest potential. You're talking about cultural change. Think about our own firm, how hard cultural change is. At Deloitte, we're 300,000 people globally. To get us to think differently, to act differently, to do our work differently, and then doing that in an environment where there is so much fear that technology is going to take over the work, that we're going to see massive job loss. it's compounding upon itself, and it's producing a really difficult environment, which only makes the focus on human capital more important now than ever.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and we'll see if we have to cut that or if you're actually going to answer it and we take it. But since you said few, can you give us one client example that you think is a really great example of where that happens today?
Yeah, so there is a global technology company. I want to be sensitive about naming clients. Global technology company that folks around the world would recognize their names. They, I think, started the journey in the right place, which is understanding that this was a mindset shift. So for every piece of new technology that they put in, they actually have a process to understand how is that impacting the work that we do, what new capabilities do we need, and then building those new capabilities and setting up all that infrastructure before the technology is released. And I think even that type of practice, so that it's always embedded, every time you're thinking about bringing new technology to the table, you're asking yourself, we have 8 questions that we identify around every time you implement new technology. What this company has done has acknowledged that there's never going to be a technology that doesn't have an impact to the work and the workforce, and ultimately the workplace. And that, even that simple framework of work, workforce, workplace, how are you thinking about all 3 elements in the context of the technology you're deploying, I think can make a huge difference. By the way, I don't think it's just the techs that are doing it. I actually think that the high techs, I don't want to say they're slower necessarily, but I think we're seeing extensive progress in some of the more traditional industries like manufacturing, retail, because they have a mandate to do so. Because they're feeling this talent crunch. They're realizing it's harder for them to attract talent. They know that they need to create the value proposition for humans, and so they need to have this process in place in order to be competitive. So it's kind of counter to what you would think. You always look to the Silicon Valley for the leading practices. The reality is, I think we should start to look at the large established organizations who are under the gun to make a change, and therefore are embracing this quicker than anyone else and bringing it into their DNA.
Yeah, I've seen this in manufacturing a lot for Internet of Things. Right. There's an opportunity to leapfrog.
Exactly.
And so they're taking that and they're getting the gains. I found that many of them, they've gone through all the process improvements they can make. They kind of like squeeze the lemon to the end. Yep. And now actually with IoT, they can actually produce more and so forth. So very similar to what you talked about in terms of human capital.
So I'll give you another framework because I'm a lifelong consultant, so I have lots of frameworks to pull out. So we talked about hot, warm, and cold bodies. We also have a framework we talk about cost, value, meaning. And what we found is that with most digital transformations, most organizations are stuck on cost. They're getting cost out, they're getting efficiencies. You can see it, but it's limited. The goal is to move from cost to value creation and ultimately to meaning. Meaning is about making a bigger impact, not only within your organization, but to the community you serve and society overall. Do we think that's important? Well, on Monday, 250 of the top CEOs in the US who are part of the Business Roundtable, you might have seen the announcement, came out in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, said, hey, we just redefined the purpose of a corporation. And the purpose of a corporation has to be more than just producing profits. The purpose of a corporation needs to be about investing on our employees and the communities that we serve. That higher purpose, that higher calling, I think is truly going to be transformational. It's going to move us along that curve from technology as a way of generating cost savings and ultimately more profits to using technology to create value and ultimately to create meaning for society. I think we're at an inflection point of a massive shift.
It's so interesting when you talk about cost, value, meaning. I noticed how I go at problems is I find something that has meaning to me. I see if it has value. And then I realize, oh, I gotta sell this to someone by showing that there's a cost saving involved. And it's really interesting to me how I sort of like, yeah, that makes sense, except the other way around. So very interesting. It
is a different view. I mean, it's really easy.
Where do you start this on this, the 3 things?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in meaning. I actually think that we have to start bringing meaning back into work. It's what motivates people.
Does it motivate you?
100%. You know, we're doing this every day. It's a hard job. You're working, you're away from your family. I just had a son, he's 10 months old.
Congrats.
Thanks, first child. And it really made me reflect on this concept of meaning, because now it's about what is the value of my time that I'm spending away from my son? And that's a very different question than how am I going to make sure I do what I'm asked because I'm part of an organization and, you know, I want to show some degree of value. It's a very different frame. And I think people are looking at that right now. You know, they're especially the millennial generation, the next generation, Gen Z. If you look at our millennial study that Deloitte produces, they have a very different view of the world than the generations before them. They want to contribute at a higher level. They want to make a broader impact. They grew up, many of them, not in a great economy, not feeling like their lives are going to be better than prior generations. So they're looking for something more. They're looking for that meaning that extends way beyond just I have a job and I have a paycheck and I'm doing what the organization says is important. And I think they're driving a significant shift in how we view enterprises. And I think it's going to have to trickle down to the organization and the C-suite to say, how do we actually make this happen? So it's great we're changing the purpose of a corporation. How do we make it real? And technology plays an enormous role in doing that because technology is pervasive. It's everywhere in the workplace. So to me, that's the new challenge for CEOs and boards.
I want to shift for my last part of this a little bit to versus looking out but looking inward. Tell me, how do you think we're doing internally in terms of, you know, shifting to meaning and value versus cost, number one, but also really much bigger, be digital, you know, be working in the work of the future kind of thing. Just your thoughts. And I think it's interesting. We have a lot of Deloitte people watching this, so to hear from you, who works a lot outside, it's really interesting. How do we lead ourselves internally?
So I'm going to try to give you an honest and appropriate answer given your audience. We talk a lot about culture of courage. I actually think that term is incredibly meaningful. And culture of courage has to be about expressing your voice, expressing your authentic self, being able to bring your authentic self, but also challenging the status quo in the way that work's getting done. I don't think we've come far enough on the journey around culture of courage to enable the move from cost to value to meaning. Because that means that not only are we allowing challenge to take place, but we're actually encouraging challenge. We're celebrating challenge. When someone comes and says, this isn't working, we don't think we have the right technology infrastructure, I have a suggestion on how to change it, we're going, great. We're going to reward you, we're going to give you money, we're going to help to make that change, we're going to celebrate that. And I think we're still in the early stages of that, because culturally, think about our culture. We come from an audit background. We come from a risk-averse culture, right? So we're trying to make this massive cultural change. And I think we have a lot of embedded practices that prevent us from doing so. So are we far on the journey? No, I don't think so. I'm starting to hear, I'm the most encouraged I've ever been. I've been at Deloitte for 21 years. I'm the most encouraged I've ever been that we recognize that we need to get this done. The proof will be in the pudding. When we have a dissenter, or I don't know if you ever read Adam Grant's books. Adam Grant is an organizational psychologist, very popular. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have read it. He has a book called Givers and Takers. And in there, he comes up with a 2x2 that says you could be a giver or a taker, and you could be agreeable or disagreeable. And he essentially says that the disagreeable givers are the ones that drive innovation. If we
One more time. The disagreeable givers.
Meaning you are giving of your time, you're giving of your ideas, but you're known as being disagreeable. You're the one who challenges in meetings, you're playing the devil's advocate role, even if not asked to play the devil's advocate role. I actually think we have a lot of agreeable givers at Deloitte. I do. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I actually think that's part of what makes our culture.
Do we need to shift business chemistry?
I think part of it is that. And how do we start to identify and celebrate the disagreeable givers, give them a platform for sharing their perspectives, and make sure that it's not done in the corner of the organization, but is done right in the middle of the square where everyone can see it. That's how we're going to start to do this translation. And we have to decide if we're ready for that cultural change. But truthfully, I don't think we have a choice. But that's the life of living in the human capital spaces. It's always front of mind.
There's a funny story. So I'm a boomerang, right? I was gone for 10 years and I came back.
Oh.
And 4.5 years ago when I came back, I sat in my orientation and I asked the question, so what social networks do we use to communicate? And people answered me. There was a senior manager, super nice guy, awesome intern. He says, oh, we meet every Friday and have a drink at night. And I'm like, that's not what I meant when I said a social network. I meant how do we communicate?
Well,
but I think
it's complicated in our world, right? We have relationships with every company. We have to make decisions that are good for the business and good for ourselves. But I agree with you on collaboration tools right now. I'm in the middle of a very fascinating discussion on Microsoft Teams, Yammer, Workplace by Facebook, and how do we navigate amongst all these tools when at the end of the day,
Chatter.
Exactly.
We can keep going on this.
We have to,
Slack.
At least we agree that we need a collaboration tool that brings it together. I mean, we have research up the wazoo that tells us that collaborations and teams are the way in which innovation happens. We do need to look at ourselves and ask, why is it so complicated for us to make a decision around a tool, go and do it? And how do we manage the impacts to the ecosystem and all of our relationships? The reality is, every client we serve is dealing with the same exact problem. They have relationships, they have to make a choice, and they're navigating it. That's the world of alliances and ecosystems that we found ourselves in. So we just need to be able to have the confidence to make those decisions and know we're a massive firm with a great brand that has tremendous power. How are we going to use it? How are we going to start to function in a different way and stop acting like maybe we were 175 years ago when we were a little bit scrappier and a little bit smaller? That's not who we are anymore. We are a force to be reckoned with, and I'd like to see us take advantage of that potential.
I'm so with you, and I want to close by sharing something with you. Having been outside and being in, one of the things I appreciate the most about Deloitte is that even though we might not have enough disagreeable givers, I still feel they're welcome. There's something about diversity that we truly live.
Yep.
You can wear a Hawaiian shirt to work and do an interview with it. I say this jokingly, but I really mean it. Sort of like this welcoming of different opinions. You only feel it after a while, but I feel it's there, and it's one of the things I appreciate the most about being here. So,
well said. Couldn't agree more.
Thank you so much for being here. There's a lot of talk about workplace of the future. And what always occurs to me is that I have a technology sort of at heart kind of thing, and I like technology. And I often think of how can technology enable what I do everywhere, not just at the workplace, but this is in particular about the workplace. And so when I think of it, I often think of collaboration tools. And I have to say it was a true game changer for me when I realized, for example, how we can co-edit documents. I hated this idea of sending around versions in emails and copying and pasting, and so sort of like this concept that I can go in and have 50 people in a spreadsheet was like stunning to me. It really changed my mind, and then the commenting on it, it sort of like became suddenly I had a social network around documents, and I love that. And in reality, it's a lot more than that. I often get asked, how can we go digital? And there's so much to that, and in a way, sensors for the Internet of Things was really another part of this puzzle for me, where sensors help me to actually, I often say, know what's going on around me versus think I know what's going on. And what I mean by that is that, many of our jobs had been interpreting what we see around us versus actually knowing. And I think the same thing is true for the workplace of the future, right? Really knowing what do people need and how can we help people. Talking with Erica, what I found super interesting is this concept and this shift from thinking about cost and shareholder value to a new paradigm which was going cost to value to meaning. And I say this in the interview, but to me, I noticed how my brain isn't even wired that way. I often gotta go and think about, I think of meaning first. What's the meaning of something? And then I think, oh, there is value there. And then sort of what clicks in is like, I had this boss who was really, one of the smartest bosses I've ever had, but he always asked, so what's the cost of that? When are we gonna save something? And so then my last step is actually cost. And it's interesting how it almost feels like my internal wiring helps me with that shift that's going on today in the workplace. And I guess I'm kind of lucky that way. But it was an interesting conversation with Erica when we talked about this whole shift from cost to value to meaning. The last thing I want to say is I really found it interesting, this concept of hot, warm bodies and particularly cold bodies. I guess I have a real affinity to cold bodies, to technology that helps us. Fortunately, they don't have feelings, so they wouldn't feel bad. But gosh, having been a contractor or being a consultant all the time and being a warm body, I was like, yeah, I don't know. This isn't the greatest marketing aspect of this. But I thought it was great to have these frameworks, and so it was a super fun conversation. In closing, I think on the workplace of the future, I think there is also a shift going on that we didn't talk about, which is really, and we call it the fluffy stuff, and she obviously, it was her words at first, but then I kind of expanded on that. I think there's actually a new form of how we have to be with each other around empathy and how we need to work together that's different. People want to show up with their full self, not just with the part that they think is appreciated. And we talked about this in another coffee chat, how empathy is definitely a part of the future worker. And I think we're going to see more of that. And it's going to be particularly hard for the people who always think of cost first. So with that, I want to leave it as empathy, and it's something I got to work on myself, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for listening to Coffee with Mr. IoT. To subscribe or to listen to more episodes, search for Coffee with Mr. IoT in your favorite podcatcher, or find us online at deloitte.com/US/Coffee with Mr. IoT. To watch the video version of our show, go to YouTube and search Coffee with Mr. IoT.